The most shocking part wasn't that Clara wanted a divorce. It was how she signed the papers. No tears, no questions, no "why are you doing this to me?" Blake sat across from her, waiting for the fight he'd rehearsed answers for all week. Instead, Clara picked up the pen like she was signing for a package. 2 minutes, done. She stood, smoothed her dress, and asked the lawyer one question. "Is that everything?" Then she walked out. No goodbye, no last look back. Blake told himself she was just proud that she'd come back once the anger wore off. He had no idea Clara already knew something he didn't, something that wouldn't catch up to him for another year, and by then it would be far too late. Welcome back. Everyone expects a woman to fight for her marriage, to cry, to beg, to ask why. Clara Richardson did none of that. She sat in a lawyer's office in New Jersey and signed away 9 years of her life in 2 minutes, and walked out without looking back, while her husband sat there stunned, wondering what he was missing. He thought he had won. Clean divorce, no mess, no scandal for the family name. But everyone around him kept asking the same question. What does she know that you don't? Blake just laughed it off, told himself that it was nothing. He was wrong. This is a story of a woman who didn't fight because she didn't need to, and a man who spent an entire year finding out exactly why. If you enjoy powerful real life stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's get into the story. The pen didn't even shake in her hand. That's the part Blake Richardson couldn't get over. Not the signature, not the date. The fact that Clara picked up that pen like she was signing for a package, not ending a 9-year marriage. 2 minutes. That's all it took. No tears, no questions. No "why are you doing this to me?" Nothing. Blake sat across from her at the long mahogany table in his father's law office, waiting for the fight he'd been bracing for all week. He'd rehearsed his answers in the shower that morning. He had a whole speech ready about how people grow apart, how nobody's the villain here, how sometimes love just runs out. He never got to use any of it. Clara slid the papers back across the table, capped the pen, and stood up. "Is that everything?" she asked the lawyer. The lawyer, a thin man named Watson who'd handled Richardson family business for 20 years, looked between the two of them like he'd walked into the wrong meeting. Yes, that's everything, Mrs. Richardson." "Good." She picked up her purse and walked out. No goodbye. No last look at Blake, just the click of her heels on the marble floor, growing quieter until the door shut behind her. Blake sat there for a long moment, staring at the empty chair across from him. He should have felt relief. He'd gotten exactly what he wanted. A clean, fast divorce. No drama. No public mess that could embarrass the family name plastered across half of downtown Newark. Richardson Holdings didn't need a scandal. His father had made that clear enough times. But instead of relief, Blake felt something cold settle in his chest. Because in 9 years of marriage, he had never once seen Clara Watson walk away from anything without a fight. Not a bad restaurant table, not an unfair parking ticket, not a disagreement with his mother about wedding flowers. And now she was walking away from her entire life without blinking. She'll be back, he told himself, gathering his own copy of the papers. She's just proud. She doesn't want to beg. He almost believed it. 3 weeks earlier, none of this had been on the table. Blake had a wife, a beautiful brownstone in Montclair, and a woman named Eden Wood, who worked 2 floors below him at Richardson Holdings in marketing, who laughed at everything he said like he was the funniest man in New Jersey. It started small, coffee in the break room, then lunch to talk about the Peterson account, then a hotel room in Manhattan that had nothing to do with any account at all. He thought he'd been careful. He was wrong. Clara found the messages on a Tuesday night while Blake was in the shower. She read every word, her face completely still. She just watched him, because by then, she already knew something Blake didn't. She was 11 weeks pregnant, and she'd already decided what kind of father she wanted her daughter to grow up with. She didn't confront him. She went to call instead. Blake made his decision 3 weeks later, on a Friday night in October. He came home, poured a drink he didn't finish, and found Clara reading in the armchair by the window. "Clara, we need to talk." He couldn't look at her while he said it. "I don't think this is working anymore. I want a divorce." He'd braced for tears, for shouting, for her to ask if there was someone else, a question he had a careful half-truth ready for. Clara didn't ask. "Okay," she said, closing her book. "I'll have papers ready by Friday." Blake blinked. "That's it?" You're not going to ask me anything? No, Clara said, standing up, her voice steady, almost gentle. I already know everything I need to know. He didn't understand what she meant. He told himself she was just proud. He almost believed it. Everyone in the family whispered about it. But deep down, a small voice kept asking him the same question. What did Clara know? He wouldn't find out for another year, and by then, it would be far too late to do anything about it. The weeks after the divorce moved fast for Blake, faster than he expected. He moved Eden into the Montclair house within a month. His mother refused to visit. His father, Cole Richardson, said even less, which, for a man who usually had an opinion about everything, felt like the loudest silence Blake had ever heard. You could at least meet her, Blake said to his father one evening at the office, standing in the doorway of Cole's corner suite on the 40th floor. Cole didn't look up from the papers on his desk. He was 68 years old, built like a man who'd worked construction before he ever wore a suit, with silver hair combed back the same way it had been for 30 years. I don't need to meet her, Cole said. Dad, I said what I said, Blake. Blake stood there a moment longer, waiting for more, but his father just kept walking like the conversation was already over. It stung more than Blake let on. His father had always liked Clara. More than liked, Cole treated her like the daughter he never had. He used to call her every Sunday, before Blake and Clara were even married, just to hear about her week. When Clara's own father passed away 3 years into the marriage, it was Cole who walked her down the aisle at her cousin's wedding because she had no one else to do it. Blake used to joke that his father loved Clara more than he loved his own son. Back then, it was funny. Now it wasn't. She left me, Dad, Blake said, trying one more time. Doesn't that count for something? Cole finally looked up. His eyes were tired, but there was something sharp underneath the tiredness, something Blake couldn't quite read. You didn't get left, son, Cole said quietly. You threw her away. There's a difference. Blake didn't have an answer for that. He turned and left the office without another word. Eden was different from Clara in almost every way. Where Clara had been quiet and steady, Eden was loud and bright, always laughing, always wanting to go somewhere new, dinners in the city, weekend trips to the Hamptons, a closet full of designer bags that seemed to multiply every time Blake blinked. He didn't mind at first. He told himself he'd earned this. 9 years of a marriage that felt more like a business partnership than a romance. Now he had someone who made him feel young again. But 3 months in, cracks started showing. Why does your dad still act like I don't exist? Eden asked one night over dinner, swirling wine in her glass. It's been months, Blake. When is he going to accept me? He will, Blake said, though he didn't fully believe it himself. He just needs time. Time, Eden repeated, like the word tasted bad in her mouth. Your mother won't even look at me at the country club. Do you know how humiliating that is? Blake reached for her hand across the table. Once the wedding happens, things will settle down. You'll see. Eden pulled her hand back slightly. The wedding, she said. Right. When exactly is that happening, Blake? He didn't have a good answer for that either. Meanwhile, Clara had disappeared almost entirely from Blake's world. No calls, no messages, no sightings at the places they used to go together. It was like she'd packed up and vanished the day she walked out of that lawyer's office. Blake heard through mutual friends that she'd moved into a small apartment near Hoboken, close to the water. Someone mentioned she'd started working again, some kind of consulting job, nothing flashy. It didn't sound like the Clara he remembered, the one who used to talk about wanting a big house with a garden someday. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself he was happy. But late at night, when Eden was asleep beside him and the house was quiet, Blake would sometimes lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment in the lawyer's office. The pen, the silence, the way Clara had looked at him, not with hatred, not with sadness, but with something closer to pity. Like she already knew how this story was going to end. 6 months after the divorce, Cole Richardson called a family dinner. But this dinner felt different from the moment Blake walked into his father's house in Short Hills and saw the table set for 4. Who else is coming? Blake asked, loosening his tie. Cole was pouring himself a drink at the backyard, his back turned. You'll see. At exactly 7, the doorbell rang, and when Blake heard the voice in the front hall, his stomach dropped. Clara. She walked into the dining room looking nothing like the woman who'd signed those papers in 2 minutes flat. She looked rested, lighter, somehow, like she'd set down a weight she'd been carrying for years. Her hair was longer. She wore a simple green dress, nothing flashy, and yet Blake couldn't stop staring. "Clara," Blake said, standing up too fast, knocking his napkin to the floor. "I didn't know you'd be. Your father invited me," Clara said simply, taking the seat directly across from him, the same seat she'd had at this table for 9 years. "I hope that's all right." Blake looked at his father, who was calmly cutting into his steak like nothing unusual was happening. "Of course," Blake managed. "It's good to see you." Dinner was tense but civil. Cole asked Clara about her new job. She was doing financial consulting now, something about small businesses and restructuring debt. Work, she said, she found more satisfying than she expected. Blake's mother asked about her apartment. Clara answered every question warmly, easily, like walking back into this house after everything that happened was the most natural thing in the world. Blake noticed something else too. Every time Clara laughed at something his father said, Cole's whole face lit up in a way Blake hadn't seen in months. It made something ugly twist in his chest. Jealousy, maybe, or shame. He couldn't tell which. After dinner, while his mother and Clara cleared plates in the kitchen, Blake found himself alone with his father in the study. "Why did you invite her, Dad?" Blake asked, trying to keep his voice even. Cole swirled the ice in his glass, staring out the window at the dark garden. "Because she's family, Blake. That doesn't just disappear because you signed a piece of paper. She's not my wife anymore." "No," Cole agreed, "she's not." Something in the way he said it made Blake's skin prickle. "Dad, is there something you're not telling me?" Cole turned to face him fully for the first time all night. For a long moment, he just studied Blake's face, like he was searching for something and hadn't quite decided if he'd find it. "Do you remember the conversation we had?" Cole said slowly. "Back when you first told me you were marrying Clara? Do you remember what I told you that day?" Blake frowned, trying to think back. You said you liked her, that she was good for me." "I said more than that." Cole set his glass down on the desk. "I told you that woman was worth more than every dollar this family has ever made. I told you if you ever did anything to lose her, you'd regret it for the rest of your life. Dad, I know you liked her, but I don't think you understand what I'm telling you, son." Cole's voice was quiet, but there was still underneath it now. "I don't think you understand at all." Before Blake could ask what he meant, Clara appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a dish towel. "I should get going," she said. "Early morning tomorrow." Cole walked her to the door himself. Blake watched from the study window as his father hugged her goodbye on the front steps, holding on a bit longer than seemed necessary, something Blake couldn't hear. Clara nodded at whatever he said. Then she got into her car and drove away into the dark. Blake stood there a long time after her taillights disappeared, that cold feeling from the lawyer's office creeping back into his chest. Something was happening that he didn't understand. And for the first time since the divorce, he was starting to feel afraid of what it might be. By the 9th month, things with Eden had started falling apart in ways Blake couldn't ignore anymore. The engagement he kept promising never happened. Every time Eden brought it up, Blake found a new excuse. Work was busy. His father needed him focused on the merger. Now wasn't the right time. The truth was simpler than any of his excuses. Though he wouldn't admit it even to himself, something felt wrong and he didn't know how to fix it. Cole had grown more distant with each passing month. He stopped inviting Blake to strategy meetings he used to always include him in. He started taking long lunches with the company's chief financial officer, meetings Blake wasn't told about until after they happened. When Blake asked about it, his father brushed him off with vague answers about restructuring and planning ahead. Planning for what? Blake pressed one afternoon, standing in his father's office doorway again, a position he seemed to occupy more and more these days. "The future of this company," Cole said, not looking up. "Someone has to think about it, Blake. It's not going to think about itself. I'm your son. I run half this company. Why do I feel like I'm being cut out of decisions?" Cole finally set down his pen. He looked older than Blake remembered, tired in a way that went deeper than just business stress. "Because you've been distracted," Cole said. "For the last year, your mind hasn't been on this company. It's been somewhere else entirely. That's not fair, isn't it?" Cole's eyes were steady, unblinking. "Tell me, son, how's the wedding planning going with Eden?" Blake didn't answer. "That's what I thought," Cole said, and went back to his papers. Meanwhile, Eden's patience had worn thin to almost nothing. She'd started spending more time at the Manhattan apartment Blake kept for business trips, claiming she needed space to think. She'd started meeting friends for dinner without telling him where. Once, Blake saw a message on her phone from a name he didn't recognize, someone named George, that made his stomach turn. Though when he asked about it, Eden waved it off as just a friend from the gym. He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her, because if Eden left too, what exactly had any of this been for? Late one night, unable to sleep, Blake found himself scrolling through old photos on his phone. Vacations with Clara, their wedding day, quiet mornings in the Montclair kitchen before everything fell apart. He didn't know why he was looking. He just knew that somewhere between signing those divorce papers and this exact moment, he'd lost something he couldn't name, and no amount of new furniture or new relationships seemed able to fill the space it left behind. He thought about calling her. He got as far as opening her contact, his thumb hovering over the call button. He didn't press it. Instead, he set the phone down and stared at the ceiling, the same way he had for months now, replaying that moment in the lawyer's office over and over like a scene stuck on repeat. The pen, the silence, the pity in her eyes. What did you know, Clara? He didn't have to wait much longer to find out. 2 weeks later, Cole Richardson called Blake into his office on a Friday afternoon, his voice tight over the phone in a way Blake had rarely heard before. "Come in now, Blake. We need to talk, and bring your lawyer." Blake sat frozen at his desk for a long moment after hanging up. Bring your lawyer. Those 3 words meant only one thing in his family. Something serious was about to happen. Something that couldn't be undone with an apology or a good excuse. He grabbed his jacket, his hands trembling slightly as he buttoned it, and headed for the elevator, the cold feeling in his chest finally taking a shape he couldn't ignore anymore. Whatever his father was about to tell him, Blake had the sinking feeling it was going to change everything. The office felt different when Blake walked in. His father sat behind the desk, and beside him sat Watson, the family lawyer, along with a folder thick enough that Blake's stomach dropped just looking at it. "Sit down, son," Cole said. Blake sat. "What's going on?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Dad, you're scaring me." Cole exchanged a look with Watson, then folded his hands on the desk. "Do you remember 3 years ago when I updated my will?" "Vaguely," Blake said. "You said it was just standard stuff, estate planning." "That's what I told everyone," Cole said. "It wasn't entirely true." Watson opened the folder and slid a document across the desk. Blake picked it up with shaking hands, scanning the legal language, most of it going over his head until he reached a paragraph near the bottom, highlighted in yellow. He read it twice before the words actually sank in. In the event that Blake Cole Richardson initiates divorce proceedings against Clara Ann Richardson nee Watson for any reason other than her documented infidelity or abuse, his inheritance of Richardson holdings, including all shares, properties, and controlling interest, shall be forfeited and redirected as outlined in Appendix C. Blake's hands went cold. "Dad, what is this?" "It's exactly what it says," Cole replied, his voice quiet but firm. "I wrote that clause 3 years ago. Because I saw the way you were starting to look at other women at company parties. I saw the late nights that had nothing to do with work. I knew you, Blake. I knew what you were capable of before you did it. You can't be serious. You're punishing me for divorcing my wife? I'm holding you accountable for throwing away the best thing that ever happened to this family," Cole said, and for the first time, real anger crept into his voice. "You didn't just lose a marriage, Blake. You broke a promise you made in front of 200 people at your own wedding. And you did it for a woman half your mother's age who works 2 floors below your old office." Blake felt like the room was closing in. Does Clara know about this? Did she know when she signed the papers? Cole's silence was answer enough. "She knew," Blake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She knew this whole time and she never said anything. I told her before you ever said the word divorce," Cole admitted, the same week she found out she was pregnant. "I sat her down and told her that if it ever came to that, if you ever did this to her, fighting you in court, dragging it out, making it messy and public, would only give you room to argue, to blame her, to muddy the whole thing. But if she let you go quietly, without a fight, the clause would trigger clean and simple. You'd lose everything and it would all go to her instead." Blake stared at his father, stunned. "And she just let me sign?" "She didn't want revenge, Blake," Cole said, and something almost gentle entered his voice for the first time. "She told me that. She said she didn't want your money and she didn't want to punish you out of spite. She said if this was really who you were underneath everything, the truth would come out on its own, and she'd rather let you learn that lesson than force it on you." Blake sat back in his chair, the document trembling in his hands. "There's one more thing," Cole added, quieter now. "What else could there possibly be?" Cole reached into the folder and pulled out a second piece of paper, sliding it across the desk. Blake looked down at it, a birth certificate, filled out just 4 months ago. "Baby girl, mother, Clara Ann Watson. Father, Blake Cole Richardson." Blake's whole body went numb. She was pregnant, he whispered. The night I asked for the divorce, she already knew. She found out 2 days before she found those messages on your phone, Cole said. She told me everything, Blake. She wanted to tell you the truth that night. But then she saw the messages and she realized who you'd really become. So she made a choice instead. She decided to protect her daughter from growing up watching her father choose someone else over his own family again and again. Blake put his head in his hands, the weight of everything crashing down at once. Where is she now? He asked. Where's my daughter? Cole's expression didn't soften. That, he said, is no longer any of your business. Blake didn't remember the drive to Clara's apartment in Hoboken. He didn't remember parking the car crooked against the curb or running up 3 flights of stairs, his lungs burning, his heart pounding harder than it ever had in the boardroom, harder than it had even on his wedding day. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder. Clara, Clara, please, I know everything. Please just open the door. The door across the hall opened instead. An older woman peered out, eyeing him with suspicion. She moved out last week, honey. Didn't leave a forwarding address. Blake felt the floor tilt beneath him. Do you know where she went? Anything at all? The woman shook her head slowly. She just said she was starting somewhere new, somewhere quiet, for her and the baby. Blake stood in that hallway for a long time after the door closed, staring at nothing, the truth settling into his bones like something permanent. He'd lost the company. That part he could almost accept. Money came and went, and deep down he'd always known some part of him deserved it. But losing Clara, losing a daughter he'd never even met, a little girl whose first cry he'd missed because he was too busy chasing something that turned out to be nothing at all, that was a loss no amount of money could have ever measured. Eden left 3 weeks later, once word got around about the inheritance clause. She didn't even bother with a real goodbye, just a text message that said she'd always known this wasn't going to work out long term, and that she hoped he'd land on his feet. Blake didn't respond. There wasn't anything left to say. He moved into a smaller apartment near his old office. The Montclair house sold within 2 months to cover legal fees and the small allowance his father agreed to provide. Generous, but nowhere near what Blake used to command. He kept working at Richardson Holdings, but in a different role now, no longer heir, no longer golden son, just an employee among hundreds of others, learning to build something new from a foundation he'd nearly burned to ash. It was almost a year to the day after the divorce when Blake finally saw her again. He was walking through Washington Park on a Saturday morning, coffee in hand, mind somewhere far away, when he heard a small laugh that stopped him cold. He turned, and there she was, Clara, sitting on a bench near the fountain, a baby girl in her lap wearing a tiny yellow sundress, giggling at something Clara had just said. Blake stood frozen at a distance, unsure whether to approach, unsure if he even had the right to. Clara looked up, as if she felt him watching. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Finally, she stood, lifting the baby onto her hip, and walked toward him slowly. "Hi, Blake," she said. Her voice was calm, the same steady calm he remembered from that day in the lawyer's office. "Clara." His voice cracked on her name. I'm so sorry for everything. I had no idea. If I'd known." "I know," Clara said gently. "That's exactly why I didn't tell you." Blake looked down at the baby, who stared back at him with wide, curious eyes, the same green eyes Clara had. His chest tightened in a way he'd never felt before. "Can I? Is there any chance I could?" "Her name is Edith," Clara said before he could finish the question. "And yes, Blake, there's a chance. Not today, maybe not even this year. But if you're serious, really serious, not just because you lost everything and you're looking for something to hold on to, then there's a chance." "I am serious," Blake said, his voice breaking. "I promise you, Clara, I am." Clara studied his face for a long moment, the same way his father had studied him in the study that night, searching for something honest underneath all the noise. "Then prove it," she said simply, "not with words, with time." She turned and walked back toward the bench, sitting down and settling Edith back into her lap, already moving on with her morning, already building the quiet, steady life she'd chosen for herself and her daughter, one small step at a time. Blake stood there in the middle of the park, coffee going cold in his hand, watching the two people he'd nearly lost forever, understanding for the first time in his life what it truly meant to be given a second chance he hadn't earned yet. He didn't know if he deserved it. But for the first time in over a year, he knew exactly what he wanted to spend the rest of his life trying to become.
Blake didn't lose Clara the day she signed those papers. He lost her the day he decided that a co-worker's laugh meant more than 9 years of his wife's loyalty. Clara never raised her voice. She never begged him to stay. She just quietly protected herself, protected her daughter, and let Blake's own choices do the talking. Sometimes the loudest lessons comes wrapped in silence. If this story hits you, if you've ever watched someone walk away calm when everybody expected them to break, let me know in the comments. And if you believe actions always catch up with people eventually, drop a like before you go. Subscribe, turn on that notification bell, because next week's story might hit even closer to home. I'll see you in the next one.